This video is a recording of the online Q&A session on self-regulated learning and its applications in online and home learning environments. This session is part of the SLIDEshow project. More information you can find on slideshowproject.eu.
Hello everybody to our SLIDEshow Q&A self-regulated learning and its applications in online and home learning environments. We are very delighted to see such a high amount of interest from your part. I would say we go through the schedule of our meeting today, and I will tell you what you have to expect from this meeting. Valerie, if you could proceed to the corresponding, exactly. Okay, so first of all, we will have a small introduction round because we have about 7, 8 or even 9 experts assembled today. Everyone will present him or herself in the small introductory round, and then we will proceed with the topic at hand, self-regulated learning itself. And also Valerie will give us a short overview over our slideshow project with that you have heard something about. Then we will talk about self-regulated learning from a teacher's perspective. And we will continue with the implementation of self-regulated learning in different contexts. Then a question which was asked by you quite a lot is how we can motivate our students. So we will continue with the topic emotions, motivation, and student encouragement. And we will then go on to talking about SRL and learning evidence. So how can we measure the efforts of our students? And we will end with SRL in practice. So if you want to know how you can apply the things we have talked about to this moment in your teachings, then this will be the topic for you. Okay, I think I have some things else I can tell you. Yes, how did we come to this schedule, or how did we choose the topics? On the one hand, we collected all the questions you posted when registering for this evening, for this Q&A. So this Q&A is highly based on your personal interests. On the other hand, we noticed that there's a wide range of different levels of experience. So some of you said that you have already been using different SRL practices for years in your own teaching. Others have said that they haven't even come in contact with self-regulated learning. So we tried to find some kind of a middle ground so that everyone can take something away from for him or herself. Okay, now maybe the situation on at hand is that we are, at least in some countries, still locked in our houses. So everyone is eager to talk about this virus we have to deal with. Today, this session will not be about the coronavirus, but of course it will deal with the aftermath of Corona, if we can say it that way. So if you have questions related to this topic, or of course questions related to what can I do from at home to deal with this situation in my teachings, then please don't hesitate to ask those questions in the chat. Okay, I think that's it from my part. If I may introduce myself, I'm Walter Svoboda. I teach at the University College for Teacher Education in Vienna. I will be the moderator for this evening, and I'll be accompanied by Elpiniki Margariti from Duca School, who will be my co-moderator. Elpi, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Elpiniki Margariti. I'm from Greece. I'm in the Research and Innovation Department of Duca School. So today I will be the co-moderator. I have been in this project for a year. And then let's go to our panel members. Kun, is he here? Valerie, I can't listen to you.
He's not yet here, but I represent Kun too, and if he joins later, he can introduce himself, of course, too. But I am Valerie Thomas. I work at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels as a researcher, and I'm a visiting professor at Ghent University, both in the educational sciences. I did a PhD on informal parental support for self-regulated learning at home, and currently I am the project coordinator for the SLIDEshow project, of which this Q&A session is a part of. And I give the floor to Katja. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Katja Alexiou, and I am a coding and robotics teacher at Duca School. Also, I'm a research assistant at University of Piraeus, where currently I finished writing my PhD in the research field of e-portfolios and self-regulated learning. And in a few days, I will deliver my PhD defense presentation. I'm very happy to be here with you. And now I give the speech to Mr. Kotsanis.
Hello from me. I'm Yannis Kotsanis. I'm the head of R&D department at Duca School. And I'm very happy to be here with you. Thank you. I will now give the microphone to Hannah. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Yannis. So, hello, everybody. So nice to see that so many of you are able to do this and join us, even though we know all that you are all really busy in this moment. My name is Hanna Järvenoja. I work as a professor in University of Oulu, Finland, in Learning and Educational Technology Research Unit. And in our research group, we are really focused on studying regulated learning in different learning contexts and with different ages of students, from early education to higher education. And we are also particularly focused on studying regulated learning in different kind of social learning context and in collaborative learning. My own research focus is especially in the field of motivation and emotions and how they are part of regulated learning. Actually, very important part if you ask me. But as I said, I'm happy to see you all here, and I hope we have a nice evening with a really good conversation and discussion about this topic, which is really current in general in these times. We are all required a lot of self-regulations to cope with this. But now I give the floor to Marika. Go ahead.
Thank you, Hanna. Hello all. Nice to see that there is that much interest towards our topic. My name is Marika Koivuniemi. I work as a PhD researcher in University of Oulu, Finland, in Learning and Educational Technology Research Unit, so in the same team than Hanna. And I am studying self-regulated learning and how it can be supported in school. So very topical issue for me too. And I give this online floor next to Jeltsen.
Hi everyone, I'm Jeltsen Peters. I worked as a researcher for the VUB, but now I am working for GEO, Education of the Flemish Community. I did a PhD on the implementation of self-regulated learning in primary education, and I was the project coordinator of the TMEL project. and now I'm involved in the SLIDEshow project from GEO's point of view. And for GEO, self-regulated learning is a very important topic, and I'm happy to be able to continue the work has been done on self-regulated learning within our schools as well. And I think I can introduce Evelien now.
I'm unmuting my microphone. Thanks for inviting me to this. I'm Evelien de Groos. I am a headmaster or principal, and I have a daughter, as you can see. I'm headmaster of Flex Secundair Onderwijs in Leopoldsburg. That's a GEO school. It's an old school with a new vision recently we applied. And in the vision, SRL is a very important part. For now, we are developing it for students from 12 to 20 year old, and in the following years we will develop an educational line from toddlers to graduation. So I took part in the SRL project for an Erasmus Plus course in Athens. So I visited a Dukas school in the spring, and as for that, I was hooked on everything that is about student-centered learning. So we're trying to apply this in our school as well. I think I have to give to pass it on to Wolfgang now.
Yes, thank you, Evelien. I think I am the one where the bucket stops, since I'm the last one on the list. My name is Wolfgang Kredler. I work for the University College of Teacher Education, where we educate, as the name says, teachers for primary schools, vocational schools, and for secondary schools in Austria, in Vienna. And my research interest lies mainly in the field of learning evidence and learning data, that is also called learning analytics. And because the current crisis has moved a lot of the teaching online using different tools and instruments, this field of how we can actually measure progress of our students from afar, using their digital footprint. That's basically what I'm here to talk about.
Okay, so thank you very much for this introductory round. I think we can straight get to the topic and start with the question, what is SRL? What is self-regulated learning? And Valerie will tell us more about this.
Yes, I will. I will first start to give a really short explanation on the SLIDEshow project, of which this Q&A session is part of. It's in the full name is Showcasing Self-Regulated Learning Implemented Through Data-Driven Education. It's an Erasmus Plus project that started in 2017 with partners in Greece, in Belgium, Finland, and in Austria, as you could hear from the introduction, of course. The aim of the project is to raise awareness of the importance of self-regulated learning for primary and lower secondary education with teachers, teacher educators, policymakers, and researchers. Our aim is to establish a European-wide network on self-regulated learning and share some good practices of implementation. We tried to accomplish this all, and we set up already some trainings. We had one in Vienna last week normally, but the COVID-19 situation did us cancel that, of course. And therefore we created a virtual one, a Q&A session, which you are part of now. We also developed some tools to support the introduction of self-regulated learning into the classroom practice. But later on that more. So it's on self-regulated learning, but what is self-regulated learning? Self-regulated learning is actually an umbrella concept. It can be interpreted in very different ways. It captures a lot of strategies that learners can use to self-direct their thoughts, feelings, behavior, and their motivation, and it helps achieve their learning goals. It's actually about taking the learning process in their own hands. You can see it a bit like taking a bike ride, where students choose which route they will take, which bicycle, at what pace that they will cycle, etc. They'll have to stop regularly on their journey to see if they're still on the right track, if their route needs to be adapted, or they need to cycle harder, for example. It's more than independent learning. It's not the same as letting go of students or of control as a teacher. Not at all, actually. It comprises of several skills that students need to learn, and teachers can support them and guide them in that journey. There are a couple of models, theoretical models that describe self-regulated learning, and the most known is that the one I show now. It's the one of Barry Zimmerman. It's a cyclical model in which the circle is always going around, and you can start again at any point. And the learner goes through different stages. You have the forethought phase, in which strategies are covered, which learners use before the task. So, for example, making a plan, setting up goals for a specific learning assignment. The performance phase is more the strategies while learning. For example, deciding which learning strategy, memorizing strategy, elaboration strategy the learner will use to complete the task. And then we have the self-reflection phase, in which the learner looks back at his work, used strategies, and thinks about the things he did and what he could change for the next time. As you can see, there are different stages that cover different strategies, and all these strategies and phases are explained in the T-Mail app. The T-Mail app is developed in an earlier Erasmus Plus project with SRL's experts, and it gives more information. It's a mobile teacher training app that gives more information on self-regulated learning and guides you as a teacher through self-regulated learning in practice. It's available in different languages, and it can be downloaded for free. So if you want to know more in detail, of course, of every phase or every strategy of self-regulated learning, you can definitely go to the app and download it. So that was in a real nutshell what self-regulated learning is about.
Okay, Valerie, have you finished your short presentation?
Yeah, on self-regulated learning or the general concept.
Perfect. So we may continue with some questions that you have asked beforehand when registering for our Q&A. So I think a very important question is, why do we apply SRL? So what's the main benefit? Maybe Valerie, you could tell us what's the benefit most and for all for our students, but also what's the benefit for us as teachers?
Mm-hmm. Yep. SRL is found as one of the most effective ways to increase academic success in primary school, but also in secondary education. And it's also found to have a beneficial impact on students' motivation and their well-being at school. So the more motivational, emotional aspects are also important. It learns the students some problem-solving skills that are not only important inside school, but also outside in other aspects of their life. So that are the main benefits or opportunities for students. For teachers, I would say it's the benefit is not really a benefit, but you take on another role. You take more the role of a mentor, and you can guide your students in another way through learning. And it gives new opportunities in that sense. And SRL is also found in research to help reduce some destructive behaviors of problems in class. So that might also be a beneficial aspect for teachers, of course.
Thank you, Valerie. You've talked a bit about the different phases in the Zimmerman model. One question was, is there any reasonable sequence in which self-regulated learning practices should be taught? Also regarding the age of the children, or how would you go on? How would you teach small children? How would you teach older students?
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's depending on the child's age, on which strategies or which or how to support self-regulated learning. I wouldn't say there is a clear sequence, like you'd have to do this first or this, and then it will work out fine. It's dependent on the child's age, as I said, and also on your class group. It's an individual, or you can adapt it to students. I would say, in my opinion, I think planning skills are a good one to start with. It's also rather easy to start with at a younger age. And also teaching students some specific learning strategies, for example, elaboration strategies or how to memorize, visualize things, it's applicable at all ages. You can adapt it at all ages. And it's about giving them a toolbox which can be more complex at a later age than it is in a younger age. So it can differ by age, of course. And then, of course, the self-evaluation strategies, I think, are also important. But it's more on how structured or how guided as a teacher how guided you do it as a teacher, or how much autonomy you give the students. In primary school, it can be much more guided than it is in secondary education, for example.
So self-regulated learning is not something that's all or nothing. So you can go on with it step by step, and you can feed it into your teachings. So if I might ask you a last question, what do you think? What's your gut feeling? What are the do's and the don'ts regarding self-regulated learning if you teach students? What's the main part you should focus on, or what are really what's the most important thing when teaching those skills?
I would say that you don't expect that that your students already self-regulate by themselves. It's a gradual process that that takes time. It can take a lot of time until they are really self-regulated, so to say. And it's not the purpose at all for teachers to let go of the control in classroom and let to students what they want. It's more a guided journey, as I mentioned earlier, to independent, self-directed learning in which students are aware of what they are doing, how they are learning. So a must-do, if I can say it like that, is to give students autonomy and choices, and that the teacher is more a guide and a mentor in that process.
Okay, Valerie, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. I think Evelyn wants to tell us something about her personal experiences in managing her school.
Yes, thank you. As a headmaster, as a principal, I often noticed, especially on teacher meetings, that even the most motivated teachers often said, "Oh, they're never handing in papers, and I'm trying to motivate my students, and still they're not handing it in, and what do I do wrong, and what do they do wrong, and why don't they do it?" And when I started developing my own regarding SRL, I learned that not handing in a paper, for instance, is not just not handing in a paper. There's always a deeper knowledge behind it. Is it that the student is simply not motivated? Is it that the student needs a different approach than the student that doesn't see, for instance, task value, or a student that lacks skills in planning or time management or self-monitoring? Those students all need different approaches from you as a teacher. And when you are aware of that, when the teacher knows the different, so to speak, locations of where it goes wrong, that makes you a better coach. And when you're a better coach, you are better at motivating the student again to pick up their learning process and to take them further in that. And I witnessed as my teachers got stronger in coaching, because they were more aware of what was behind the just not handing in things, or the just not doing things, or doing things wrong, or keeping doing things wrong, that the students got better too. So for me, the quality of the coaching and the quality of the teacher knowing what to do when it goes wrong with the student was an eye-opener, and it resulted effectively in better learning for the students, and that motivated the teachers again. So it was really an upward spiral in our school that we witnessed so far. Yeah, that's I really wanted to share that, because it's important that as a teacher you know to recognize the different phases. It's not so much that it's very a new strategy or something revolutionary. It's just awareness of the different phases within the learning. And in the T-Mail app, for instance, those are presented in a way that you can learn as a teacher to recognize those different phases. And that is really a value that's something I value very much in it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, for sharing your experiences. It's really nice for me to hear that such a project, or that self-regulated learning can succeed on a school level if everyone is behind it, especially if the school principal is also behind it. So I think we can continue with Yeltsin, who will tell us something about the teacher perspective on SRL.
Yes, thank you, Walter. Valerie, could you? Yeah, thanks, Valerie. A lot of your questions obviously focused on how can we then support student self-regulated learning. So I would first like to start with very briefly explaining how self-regulated learning develops in students. It mostly evolves through 4 phases. At first, students learn by simply observing models, and the models that's most often the teachers, obviously. The second phase consists of trying to extract the essence of a particular self-regulation strategy. If you as a teacher have been modeling how to draw up a weekly plan, you can help them find out what is good planning, what does it look like, why is it important, and how can you do it. So that is all about this emulation phase, and in that phase it's very important for you as a teacher to actually explain and instruct the particular SRL strategy. The third phase is about self-control. It means that you as a learner, you can start practicing the specific SRL skill on your own in a very specific setting, for example, in an assignment or group work. And the teacher is still present to give feedback. And then only in the fourth phase, you become self-regulated and you really master a particular self-regulation skill. That being said, we can move to the following slide. It's very important to know that these 4 phases actually apply to each and every one of these self-regulated learning strategies. And what you see here is just the same model that was shown by Valerie, but actually illustrated by the images that we created in the T-mail project, and which you can also again find in the T-mail app. So it's not just, you can't just talk about self-regulation in general. It's very important that you support each and every one of these very specific SRL strategies. Also very important to know, it's not because someone now finally mastered the skill of goal setting or self-evaluation that he will also do it. So it's really a matter of skill and will, and it's very important for you as a teacher to try to differentiate between those students. Imagine that you have a student that is really good at self-evaluation, but he's just simply not doing it. Then you need another approach than someone who's not self-evaluating because he can't do it. If he doesn't have the skill, you should teach him, you should explain him, but don't remind him or encourage him because he will get very frustrated. He just doesn't know how to do it. On the other hand, the one that does know how to self-evaluate but doesn't do it, you don't want to send him to a training because he will get very demotivated and bored. He already knows how to do it, he's just simply not doing it. So those kind of students need to be reminded and motivated to self-regulate. Then how can you as a teacher, and you can go on, Valerie, how can you then as a teacher support your students developing your students? There are multiple general ways. At first, there is this indirect way of supporting self-regulated learning, and that's all about creating a particular learning environment. And many schools do that already. Learning environments that offer authentic learning situations, problem-based learning, group work, formative assessment, growth mindset. So all kinds of contexts in which we know that the student gets autonomy for learning and has the opportunity to practice self-regulation skills. However, this is absolutely not sufficient, and actually it could be kind of dangerous, if I can put it that way, to just offer the autonomy and not directly support their self-regulation strategies. So it's really important to not think that self-regulated learning is just the same as providing the autonomy and just having him decide what and when to learn. So importantly, you have to also directly support your students' self-regulated learning, which can be done in an implicit way, meaning that you could model good behavior, how you manage your emotions, how you set goals for the week, etc. It's also about encouraging and reminding students to, for example, seek help in an effective way. And then the final way you can support your student self-regulated learning is the most effective one. It's actually explicitly explaining what a specific strategy is, why you use it, when you use it, and how you use it. And that's this WWWH rule about. So this instructing SRL strategies is very important, but you need to do this integrated within content. There is no use in just giving separate learning to learn sessions isolated from normal subjects such as math or geography. It really is important that you provide systematic support to self-regulation, and also as a teacher team, you're on the same level, so that you could have a continuous support of self-regulated learning, because only then students will be able to also their self-regulation skills to different contexts. This is not something that happens automatically. And then obviously feedback plays a very big role as well. Provide feedback on the very specific SRL strategies, as you could see from the poster. So that's in a nutshell, I guess, the basic principles that you need to keep in mind when supporting your students' self-regulated learning.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeltsin, for this introduction. A question I have in mind is, now that we're pretty much all stuck at home, as well as our students, how could we apply those things you told us about? How can we apply this in a distance learning environment?
I, of course, expected this this question, so I had another slide if I could show it, because I think it's easier to focus. Actually, it's the exact principles, as I just mentioned, and that you support in a classroom context. Obviously, you have multiple online tools that could help you, for example, with scheduling or time registration, self-evaluation, etc. And actually, Katja is going to go into more details there. But I think tools don't replace the teacher. It's really about the teacher deciding when to use a tool and why. So for what purpose of supporting self-regulated learning. So in that sense, I think it's really the same principles. What is more difficult, of course, is modeling good SRL behavior. Obviously, students are no longer watching you the entire day. So you might want to look for other opportunities, and those can be very small. Imagine that you asked a teacher, a colleague of you, to help you set up a Google Classroom. You could kind of mention that along the way to your students, like, hey, you know, I was really spending a lot of time in Google Classroom, it didn't work, and I was getting really frustrated and demotivated, but hey, then I thought, who can I ask? I asked a colleague for help, and now I'm really all set up. And before you know it, you're actually talking about help-seeking behavior. And actually, in a lot of situations, you as a teacher could come up with such examples of your own as well, I think. What you could do as well, because I know that lots of you are finding ways to observe how your students are learning and to try to support them in this autonomous learning. I would say look at the poster, and we will send the poster afterwards, and start with one or two as a piece and focus on them. Just choose the ones that you really work at. So if you're really good in time management, perhaps then start with that, or pick a strategy that you think will have a lot of impact. If you have students who have a very difficult home situation, then you might focus on environmental structuring and helping students to find a spot where they can concentrate. If you find that students are very bad at help seeking, which is often the case when they are still very young, you might want to focus on that one. And then on another note, you could also take up the opportunity of the situation to have them kind of register or record one SRL strategy during the entire week, because now as a teacher you can't observe your students, you will have to explicitly ask them to show you how they are doing things. Imagine asking them to register the time they spend on a particular task, but having them first estimate how long it will take them, and then having them reflect on the difference between the estimated and the actual time. And so these are really things, I think, keeping learning diaries that help you as a teacher observe self-regulated learning, and the students also reflect upon it.
Okay. Thank you very much. So one last question from my part, from me, and maybe you can explain it together with Evelyn. Exactly. So what beliefs should you as teachers have, or what values should you have to be able to teach SRL? And what about the entire school team? Maybe what can school principals do to facilitate such values in their teachers?
Yes, I will address a couple of points and then give the floor to Evelyn maybe. You are exactly right. So one of the key characteristics in teachers that really explains why some teachers are supporting SRL and why others are not, their beliefs in the topic, right? Their motivation to support it. And then it's really important to know that teachers learn most, or tend to learn most from their colleagues. So just presenting them the massive evidence that we have on why self-regulated learning is important probably won't do the job. So what I think is really important is just to start talking to teachers, and first of all also to ensure that you are starting from the same definition. Teacher might be actually talking about self-regulated learning like we are presenting here today, but teacher B might have in mind that self-regulation is just about letting your student go and having him learn whatever he wants. So it's important that you figure that out first, and then help each other, link it to other frameworks that you are familiar with. What is your prior knowledge? How does it connect or conflict to that? Teachers have so many different frameworks thrown at them, so why would they have to invest in yet another one? So I think that is very important. Lots of teachers, for example, have some knowledge about executive functioning, and actually executive functioning models are sometimes really overlapping with the model of self-regulated learning. So it's not that they should compete at all. So it's just really interesting to see how the two connect and then start from there. And then before I give the floor to Evelien, I think we could also address this from SRL perspective. Within SRL theory, we say that motivation is not a stable thing. It's actually something that to some degree we can take into our own hands. So if a teacher, if you look at the poster of self-regulated learning, you have, for example, teacher self-efficacy, their confidence in their competence to support self-regulated learning. If they don't feel confident, their motivation will be low. So then perhaps start working with that, having them have small experimentations and success stories. But it might well be that the teacher doesn't just see the value of self-regulated learning. Why would I need it to reach my personal goals? And then it's really interesting to talk again and see whether it links to something that does interest him. Perhaps he's really struggling to motivate students, then link it to that. Perhaps he's really looking for ways to help gifted students and challenge them a bit more, then link it to that. So this task value, as we call it in self-regulated learning, is very important. And I think Evelien actually tries to strengthen this task value through school vision, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. Maybe it's interesting to testify that I used two strategies. At first, well, maybe it's also interesting to know that I am a principal of this school for only 2 years. I was, or a year and a half. Before that, I was a teacher myself in a different school, so I knew none of the teachers that worked there. I didn't know any of the level of self-regulation that the students had. So I had a blank screen to begin from. And at first I tried to, of course, get to know the students and the teachers. And then I learned that some teachers were already applying some strategies with their students. And I thought if I can convince those teachers to maybe to develop their own set of skills, then that will be, they will talk to others and it will be bigger and bigger in my teacher team. That worked. I won't say it didn't work. It worked, but it goes very slow. And at a certain point, it stops. So I had the luck that we changed the vision of the school. We changed the name of the school. It was a very big change. And I connected the SRL way of learning, or the knowledge behind it, to the new vision. But you can also do it with an old vision or with something that is already current in the school. And then it was implied with a larger number of teachers. And I simply told my teachers, whoever wants to know more about it, you can come on that date, on that evening. It's free. You can join if you want. If you don't want to, that's okay too. If you want to know more about it, we get some cake. We make it very cozy, and we talk about a self-regulated learning. And that was really the start of something very, very beautiful. It was actually I applied the strategies of self-regulated learning as if I was the teacher to my teachers. And then because I modeled it and because I did it with the time management and the task value and everything, all the strategies, they started to use this as well, because they noticed they were the students in this strategy, and they noticed that it worked with them. So they tried it with their students as well. And as for that, I can say that modeling really works, and teacher beliefs are really important. If your team or if teachers of the coach doesn't believe that it works and doesn't have or is willing to develop his own set of skills, it won't work with the students as well. You have to, the will and the skill have to be there with the teachers too, with the coaches too, because if it's just something that is implied by the principal or something that is implied team-wide without really the teacher believing that it's effective, it won't work. You have to be convinced, and you have to be willing to develop your own set of skills to be able to coach the students as well. That's, in my humble opinion, the most effective way of applying it to a whole team.
Okay, thank you very much, Evelyn. We have one user submitted question, so I would just ask you, Jeltsin, it's aimed at you, that you answer pretty quickly because we're already behind our time schedule. So, LP, if you are so kind.
Yeah, of course. Chrysanthi asks whether, as in distant learning, we have the teacher who is an experienced moderator. How about homeschooling, where parents are involved? Do you think training is required?
Actually, thank you, Valerie. Next, better with parents might be better able to provide a short answer. I don't know, Valerie?
Yeah, to keep it really short, I think somehow some training for parents is necessary. I did some research with parents in early secondary education, and it's most of the time a case of not knowing how to support. So I would say training, not only for teachers, but if you expect parents, and in this case in homeschooling, yeah, it comes on the plate of the parents. So really short, I think it's necessary. You can give some examples as a teacher on how you would do it, for example, and then parents, if they have the time, of course, we cannot expect that all parents can do it and do it, but you can see them as a partner and give them explicit examples on how they would be able to support some self-regulated learning skills at home. Really short.
Thank you very much, Valerie. I think we are ready to move on. So, Marika, what can you share with us?
Yes, thank you, Walter. Can you, Valerie, change the slide? Thank you. Yeah, we got a lot of questions about this, how self-regulated learning can be assessed, and especially in different situations. And just shortly, some tips how you can assess students' self-regulated learning and what we actually mean when we are talking about this self-regulated learning assessment. First of all, I would like to remember you that this self-regulated learning assessment is very important part when we are aiming to support our students' self-regulated learning skills, because it gives us a lot of valuable information about students' current learning skills, how they are working, what type of self-regulated learning strategies they are using, and what type of strategies they are probably lacking and they need more support. And also I also see the self-regulated learning assessment tools something that can actually also support students thinking about their own self-regulatory behavior. It can indirectly put students to think that what type of learner I am and how I am learning, what are the best ways for me to learn. So I would say that don't think that this assessment and support are separate from each other. They are actually something that we all have to use together when we are teaching our students. We have to assess so that we know how we need to support our students. And yeah, and then some tips that how we can assess students' self-regulated learning skills. I'm really sorry, I don't have any magic tricks for this. And this is something, this can be small things what you are doing as a teacher. You can ask simple questions from your students. Short questionnaires, smiley faces, learning diaries, different things how you collect information from your students, how they are working, how they are doing while they are working with these different learning tasks. Do not only focus the learning outcomes. Look at the process and try to figure out that how students are working while they are studying. That helps you as a teacher when you are then aiming to support the different self-regulatory strategic use. Also, be active as a teacher, observe your students and ask actively, do they need help? And if it looks like that, then give the help for the students. Also, be systematic. Collecting information just only once in 1 year probably is not giving you that much information that how the students are proceeding with their self-regulatory behavior and activities. So use the similar assessment tools and use them systematically once in a while. And also the last thing, use the information that you are collecting when you are developing and planning the coming teaching, because that information can provide you a very valuable information about the students' learning and the needs what the students are having. And it can also guide the ways that what type of teaching methods, for example, you are choosing in the next period in your teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika. I think what people might be interested in is, could you name some specific assessment tools which we could use in our teachings?
Yeah, well, there is probably quite a, well, there is a lot of different tools what we can use. In SLIDEshow project, for example, we tuned in these different tools what has been used in research field and what I think that could be also used at schools too. These can be really simple questionnaires, for example, about student strategic behavior. You can also assess students' motivation or emotions with the smiley faces. I don't want to give any really specific ready-made answers, but then I also know that there is ready-made technological tools and programs you can apply in your school where you can choose the questions what you want to ask from your students. So I think that the question should be that what type of questions you have to ask from your students so that you really know that what they need, because the students are different, the situations and schools and resources are different, so the needs are also different. So in that sense, I would say that you can also be creative and invent these questions and tools by yourselves also.
Yes, then Marika Vande asks whether sometimes a teacher has more than 200 students. So are there any tools to facilitate the coaching process?
Yeah, I didn't hear the question that well because there was some problems with the noise.
All right.
Okay, I can see the question. Sometimes the teacher has more than 200. Okay, yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have any ready-made tool for this one. Does anyone else know? Is there something that could be used with this? I think that these big student groups are more or less kind of quite challenging for the teachers to support equally and assess equally. But if you, yeah, I don't know, do you have any suggestions?
Yes, maybe I have a suggestion because the learning analytics field provides tools for larger and smaller groups of students. And of course, these are all digital tools. And most of them are connected to some kind of learning platform, Moodle, Blackboard, and so forth. And these platforms, I was going to tell you a short while later in my presentation talk, that these tools typically come with analytic tools that allow you to at least recognize who of the students is left behind, who's very much advanced, and so forth. And you can react then more specifically to individual students. I hope this answer helps.
Maybe I could also add a bit from another point of view, is that emphasizing that if you, for example, have a long-term or long-lasting projects that students are supposed to work on, you can support with even big groups that dividing those projects into sub-goals and support and follow students to set goals and plans for those subtasks, and then evaluate how they have been, how they have reached those goals, and are they in schedule and in direction of those goals, or do those goals need to be adjusted somehow in the middle? And that could be quite easily followed even with big groups with certain technological tools. And by this information and data that is gathering there, and then going to what Wolfgang was saying, that then you can easily recognize if someone is falling behind or something like that.
Thank you.
Okay.
There is also one thing that came to my mind related to these programs. I know that there is one program called GRID. It's Finnish design actually, and they are making possible to collect easily this different information about students' progress, so that students can themselves see the data and visualizations, how they are progressing, but also the teachers can see the same. So there is these tools available, which you can use also with the bigger groups.
But I think the main point here, the key issue here, is to how to support this regulation part of learning, is that you are not just if they are achieving and performing the task, but are they setting goals, how well they think they have reached those goals, then coaching to change something in their behavior and in their learning strategical behavior in learning, to adjust if they recognize something.
Okay, thank you very much for answering this question. Also, I want to let our participants know that they can find a lot of information on our homepage and on different things we put online in our blog and so on. So on the last slide of this slideshow you see in front of you, you will find the links to those resources. So maybe we could continue with Hannah, and I hope you will be able to tell us a bit about students' emotions, about students' motivation, and how we can encourage them to study on their own, especially under these new difficult circumstances.
Okay, thank you, Walter. Well, first of all, I think we all agree that motivation and emotions are important part of learning in general, and not just self-regulated learning, but learning in general. Motivation has already discussed today in many times. Yeltsin, for example, brought it up. Also, even though not maybe often that explicitly thought, but emotions are there, part of learning, and I think that has really come into front in this situation. So we are not talking only on cold issues, cognitive aspects when dealing with learning, but it's intertwined with many feelings, emotions related to learning, but also the surroundings. And learning is not happening in an isolation, but it's always situational and contextual. And what is happening within us and around us is really affecting on our learning as well, from the emotional point of view. So these aspects are definitely important part of self-regulated learning. And already, that's also someone already kind of implied to this, that without motivation, even though our students would possess a really good self-regulated learning skills, they are not coming into use, because you need this driving force to put them in the use. So without motivation, self-regulated learning doesn't happen. On the other hand, self-regulated learning models, all the models and theories we have on them, recognize motivation and emotions also as aspects that can be regulated. So it's not only the driving force, but something that student or the learner can regulate their motivation and emotions that in relation to learning and self-regulated, wider self-regulated learning process. So what this, how I often explain it is that we often think that motivation is motivation is a driver. We are sitting in the back of car, and motivation is a driver, and this driver takes us somewhere. But that's not actually the case, and that's the great part in self-regulated learning, is that now you push the motivation out from the driver's seat, and you take the driver's seat, and you drive your motivation to where you want it to take it. So you can actually take charge also on your motivations and emotions, and adapt, modify, maintain your motivation to learn through regulating motivation and emotions. Though this is not an easy task. Actually, self-regulated learning is not always that easy, not even quite skillful adult learners, so definitely not for the children and adolescents that are still learning to learn and learning to regulate. And we know from research that especially aspects dealing with motivation and emotions are difficult to recognize, or our students are not that easily recognizing the need to regulate them. And then it's just impossible to activate accurate regulatory strategies that focus particularly on those issues. Our learners and students really need help on that. So what you can do as a teacher is to increase awareness and support students to learn to regulate. And that's, I think, it's really important part of this whole SLIDEshow project. And I think it needs to be said explicitly that we are now talking kind of only how we can make our students more or help them to become more self-regulated learners, but that's actually what is the school or schooling should be about. We should help during the school years gradually kids to develop their regulatory learning skills. Learning to regulate, that's a different thing that regulated learning. That's already doing it, but it's not something that can be learned easily or fast, or it's a long-term process. It takes years to learn learning to regulate. So that's why our students need support, and that should be actually one of the goals in our schooling. Develop these skills that are really, really important part of future learning skills and kind of 21st century learning skills and coping with your work and life and even well-being and taking charge of your own work. So what you can, in practice, what you can do from this point of view is to draw your students' attention explicitly to issues dealing with their personal motivation or emotions, affective issues they are facing. Because we know from research that those are not recognized. The cognitive issues take over the recognition of motivational and emotional issues that are underneath those. So bring them into front regularly on a side of cognitive issues. It's dealing with all the parts Valerie was explaining. If you look at the Zimmerman models, those motivational and emotional issues are part of all these three phases. So there are issues you can think about from motivational point of view when you support planning and forethought. There are issues to consider on this monitoring phase or the middle phase, the actual regulation phase, such as different emotional challenges and how they can be regulated to ensure that the learning can go on. And also in the evaluation part where the student actually do these interpretations, how they are as a learner, how self-efficacy what kind of self-efficacy beliefs they build up, how am I able to do this? So doing accurate evaluations and then reacting to those in a right way. So it's not worthwhile to blame yourself of the issues you don't have control of, but then taking responsibility of the issues you can take control of. If you didn't study to a test and it went poorly, maybe you could do something to change instead of blaming something else. But if there was a good reason why you didn't success, don't take the blame on yourself, because you know that next time you can probably do better because you have better chances for preparing it. So these are attributional issues which are part of motivation. And then one thing I think that can really help to motivate is to visualize the whole process. So here we are now, here we are aiming, and this is something that is happening in between, what you can do. So you can actually help your students to find their own interest and goals and plan those, because they know what is coming and what is the room for them to adjust those goals and interests in this particular task. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for your insights. I think we have a question. It's
there's an interesting question in the chat. San asks whether home situations set back SRL. Do only the stronger students achieve self-regulation with only school support and without support from home? Yeltsin, could you please answer to that?
And moving towards the end is a very interesting question. So thank you for that. A couple of things. First of all, I think we could also take opportunity of this particular context, because all our routines and habits are shaken up and falling apart. And this could be an opportunity to discuss with students and also families how they are rearranging themselves, and I think that could be an opportunity. What's nice to know is that for some teachers, it's this very observation and concern actually motivates them even more to support those students who are at risk. And then I also think about students who are living in difficult family situations. And then I think what Hannah has been saying is very relevant. We know that stress and emotions, anxiety highly affect our learning. And therefore, I really think it's important that the moments that we actually see our students, that we could also find some time to focus on their process and actually really explicitly talk to them and discuss how their emotions are now impacting their learning and what strategies they have to let go of stress and what might actually help them. So this could be, I think, an opportunity, and also especially, and thank you therefore also for the question, especially important to support those students' self-regulation and not just focus on getting the content and finishing the curriculum, which of course is important, but it doesn't make any sense to push it if students just don't come to learning. And therefore, I think it's really important to support their self-regulation especially. And on a final note, it's also important, I think, to consider that sometimes those pupils who get too much parental support are not really learning how to self-regulate, and it's more the students who are just used to having to learn by themselves who have sometimes more capacities. So it can't be generalized. I think there is something to say for scenarios.
Thank you very much, Hildegard. I think we can move on to Wolfgang. Maybe you could give us the most important and precise insights you have found on the topic of learning analytics.
Well, I'm not sure that fits the time frame that I'm given here. However, I would want to say, can you move on the slides, Valerie, please? This connects very tightly to what Marika talked about, the assessment of learning and learning progress. And she also said quite rightly that you shouldn't only look at the results, but at the process of learning. There has been a study published in 2017, and there's a number of studies actually, where the attitudes of students towards learning evidence, and I call it learning evidence as opposed to learning analytics, because it comprises a number of things, not only data, but it's observations, it's research from the learning sciences and so on, that can be called learning evidence as a wholesale package. But what we've learned from these studies is that students and teachers as well in the background appreciate a better understanding of their own learning behaviors. They want to actually, many students want to understand how they learn, what their behaviors are, how to do things better, and so forth. They appreciate personalized assistance. They appreciate working at their own pace. This is one of the key elements I find in self-regulated learning, is that you work at your own pace and that you only interact at certain key points with other students. And the teacher is actually a moderator in terms of bringing them all together at the same level in intervals, in regular intervals. So that they don't stray too far apart from each other. But generally, the responsibility of timing and organizing their learning would gradually shift over to the students. Students also appreciate timely feedback where they are still able to change things. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. So not only waiting for the exam or the test results and the mark that they got for it, but actually feedback on the process, on how they are doing and whether they are working or learning into the right direction, goal orientation. And timely intervention means just to bring them back on track by a teacher. They also appreciate information that facilitates independent learning rather than pestering teachers. So what students have fed back in these studies was that they don't want to be told all the time how to do things better, but they want to find out themselves, or they want to learn themselves and reflect themselves on how to do things better, rather than a nagging teacher says, oh, well, you know, look at your data here and look at your results there and so on. And, you know, constant reminders, you are in danger of dropping out, you're in danger of failing the class and so forth. So a positive but independent attitude is required. Can I have the next slide, please? Well, yeah. What are the benefits of using learning data, learner data, or learning evidence for SRL? SRL requires feedback, as we know, because it monitors a process of learning. So it requires regular feedback during the learning process. The learner data and the analytics support this in the way that it allows you to monitor progress and your position, your actual position in the learning path better and more accurately. This is perhaps one example would be that students have been asked, how much time do you spend on this topic or this subject per week? And then they have put an estimate down. And these estimates typically are far from the real time spent on certain tasks. So the self-understanding of what students do and the more accurate monitoring process actually brings a more realistic picture to what's actually happening. It allows students also to, this feedback through their own learning behavior, also allows them to adjust their regulation strategies, their learning strategies, in that they see what is more effective than and what is less effective. They can repeat the process to check again. So this is a repetitive learning process on their own strategies. Of course, as we heard before in the presentation of Jeltsin, they first need to learn what strategies are actually available. So if you learn a foreign language, what kind of learning strategies do you have at your disposal, and which ones suit you best? And then you can sort of fine tune it with the behavioral data that you can get back. And I'm talking about the learner perspective here, but this is identical to the teacher perspective, because the teacher is kind of the listener in to this process and provides intervention where help is needed, where the student can't help themselves any further, either because they don't have the skills or because they lack resources. It helps students to plan the next steps and to keep a goal orientation. As we said before, you know, this also shows in between stages of the learning process that is obviously, you know, in the middle of a task geared towards an end goal or end objective that they should reach, a standard, educational standard, so to say. And this feedback keeps them in focus. They don't learn things that are not effective or not essential. There's a social aspect that is confirmed here, and here I want to briefly connect it to what Hannah just said about emotions. The comparison with others can actually support emotive behavior and motivation in the way that you can gamify data. You know, you have to be very careful with using this kind of facility, but you can keep a kind of ranking list, you know, and let students play who can post more questions or better questions in the forum or in the class and so on, and let them compare with each other. Children also like to have competitive games. So if you pack it in a competitive game, you might motivate a certain number of students. Of course, there are also losers in these games, and we should not forget that. And it should, of course, need to lead to reflection, how to do things better and not frustrate them. Yeah, so the motivation is another one. And the next slide, please. So where does that sit in self-regulated learning? The learning evidence actually supports 3 aspects of self-regulatory processes. That is self-observation, so people learn how to observe their own behaviors. This is a bit like if you want to run a marathon and you're training up to that. So you start observing what you actually do to prepare yourself for that. Are you running before breakfast or after breakfast? And then evaluate this. So you create a self-judgment and think, okay, I'm running faster, or I get faster times when I run before breakfast. Okay. And this then leads, this judgment, this evaluation should lead to a self-reaction. That is where the regulation actually sets in and where learners manipulate their behavior and their learning process. But we should emphasize that using these evidences and the data actually comes with a number of competences. This is not a straightforward process, and you know, especially in the digital world where there's a lot of digital traces available, the things can become very complex quite quickly. Next slide, please. And this is the last one, because we want to focus on what changes are actually possible and realistic. So with these self-awareness through analytics, and these are automated processes typically supported by some kind of technology, and that's why they also work in individual cases as much as in large classes of MOOCs with a couple of thousand participants. What you are able to change here is basically 3 areas of learning. The first one is the learner state, so the motivation and emotion. Where are you in the success story of learning? So keeping the goal orientation, of course, as well, so the learning behaviors in terms of what strategies work for you and what need improvement. What kind of activities you're doing in your learning behavior. For example, that is, you know, also in physical learning, like the breakfast stuff, you know, do you eat breakfast or do you not? Or, you know, also in reading, do I take notes now or do I summarize the reading stuff later? Keeping a focus as well. And then you can also, to some extent, change the environment in which the learning occurs, the situation. I'm thinking about children who are home learning at the moment through the situation now that the schools are closed, and who have brothers and sisters and dogs and cats and parents around who do homeworking. And there can be a lot of distractions, and regulating the effective learning environment is also part of the regulatory competencies that children and learners should actually achieve. But first of all, you need some kind of awareness, and analytics, data and comparisons with yourself, with your own behavior. If the parents are out, for example, or your siblings are not at home, your learning becomes better and more effective, or you do things faster. This is an awareness that you should acknowledge and then repeat, so to say. So you're learning from your success and also from your failures. The context can sometimes be manipulated. Materials where it is possible, that is, as a teacher, you are challenged to actually allow your students some flexibility. Otherwise, the more rigid an environment, a learning environment is, the less self-regulation is actually possible. And as a teacher, you need to be aware of this. So you need to allow the freedom to your students to actually regulate, to monitor and to self-judge and to regulate. Okay.
Okay, Wolfgang, thank you for your introduction to this topic. I think it will take us 10 minutes longer than we usually planned this meeting. I hope that's okay for you all. For those of you who have to leave right now, we will send you more additional information on everything we discussed right now, and we will stay in contact. If you still have the time, then we will add another 10 minutes. So let's get to our last topic for today, which will be covered by Katja, and she will tell us something about real hands-on experience or a really practical approach to SRL.
Well, actually, I can say a few paradigms and examples from our school, from Duca School, about how to support students SRL. So in our school, in Duca School, we follow a study skills empowerment program where students learn how to organize their study environment. Actually, lower grades of primary school, they try to organize their study environment, and for this reason, they engage in activities where they try to learn how to use specific basic skills and working habits. Also, they learn how to organize their school bags and their desks in school and in their houses. Also, they adopt a study time schedule. Also, for our high school students, we follow the same program, and we help them to learn how to manage their time, also how to use effectively strategies for learning. Also, another example that we have, an example that supports SRL, it's our mentorship program, where we have mentors, teacher mentors, that they meet with their students, and they help them to set their goals. During the school year, the teacher mentors meet the students, and they discuss with them about their goals. They monitor together their goals. They provide them feedback, and they help them complete these goals. At the end of the year, students and teachers, they evaluate their goals, and also the school psychologists evaluate the whole process. So we can see these examples that we are using in our school, and perhaps all of you can follow these examples. Also, I invite you to log into our platform, eTwinning platform, where you can find the SRL good practice from the project. Also, you can participate in our discussion forum, and there you can post questions if you have more questions about this. And also, we can discuss something more. I think that we have more questions about the online learning environments and SRL. So, Walter, do you think that I can answer a question about SRL and the online environments?
Of course, please just.
Okay, so we discussed before about the online environments that they can support SRL. Of course, they can support SRL. And the thing is that there are various tools that we can use. These tools can be text-based tools. They can be image-based tools. There are tools about digital storytelling assessment tools. It is important to align the different SRL strategies to different tools. So, for example, we can, let's say, we can use goal setting, how we can help students to set their goals. We can use scheduling tools like Google Calendar or Evernote, where students, they can set their goals, and then they can monitor their goals. Also, if we use learning systems like learning management systems, virtual learning environments, and content management systems, we can provide users with different services. So if we want to help them manage their time, then we can provide them with the with scheduling tools. Or if we want to help them seek for asking for assistance, then we can provide them with recommender systems, or we can, as Wolfgang said before, we can provide them with learning analytics tools so they can see their learning progress. There are so many different ideas. I think that the most important thing is that school teachers, educators in general, should first realize the concept of SRL, and then when they feel strong about themselves, I think that they can help their students to be self-regulated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katja. Maybe one last question for you. Could you give us some specific examples of tools we can use specifically in this situation to facilitate SRL with our students?
Okay, so I think now with the global health crisis, which is a unique challenge and has impacted teaching practice, I think that teaching in an online learning environment is reality. So now more than ever before, we need to activate our SRL and practice it. So we can use different tools. Let's say, as I said before, that if we want to help our students to set their goals, we can invite them use tools like Google Calendar or Evernote, where they can set and monitor their goals. Also, they can plan their activities. Also, if we want to help them organize their strategies and use different strategies like planning, highlighting, they can use different cognitive tools like concept mapping tools or mind maps. Further, if we want to help them or if we want to activate their interest, we can use tools that they provide them with badges. Also, if we want to help them structure their environment and their, we can use smart technology tools. And of course, for the self-monitoring, I think learning analytics tools will be a very good idea. Also, we can use in different collaborative tools where they can comment and interact and share their ideas, and and then they can enhance their motivation, their intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So there are various tools. I think that if you log in the H2NE platform, you can find the poster, or and perhaps in our website, where we have picked the poster and we have added different tools, so you can use them in your teaching practice.
Okay, Katja, thank you so much for letting us know about those topics. I think we have almost reached the end point of our Q&A today. Just some last words from me. Valerie, if you could be so kind and switch to the next slide. Okay, what about all the open questions? As you might have noticed, not all the questions which you have posted in the chat could be answered, and by far not all questions which you have submitted beforehand could be answered, but we are keeping those questions, and thank you again for posting those questions. We will use them to make our upcoming events even better. And maybe that leads us to the next question, namely, what's up next? What will come up next from the SLIDEshow project? And as it stands right now, the times are rather uncertain. We had planned for a Congress in Vienna which should have been conducted 2 weeks ago. Of course, we are doing this event now, this online event, as a kind of substitute. Of course, we have planned some things for the future. We can't tell you right now what those things will be. Maybe we will have another online meeting, maybe with more of a workshop character, so we and you all will be able to work together a little bit more and interact in a more interesting fashion, I might say. But we will let you know in timely what will be up next. And a last thing I wanted to ask you is, please participate in our evaluation. This really helps us a lot. So after this workshop has ended, we will send out emails with a link to our evaluation form. So please be so kind and fill in those forms. They will help us to improve our efforts for the future. So may I direct the word to our experts one last time. Did I forget about something? Do you want to say anything to our participants? Okay, so thank you very much, all of you, for joining our Q&A. It was the first time we did something like this. You noticed maybe that there were some technical bumps on the road, but I hope that the connection was good enough. I especially hope that the things we discussed were of interest for you, and I hope that we will be able to meet in person in the future. So thank you very much to you all, and see you. Bye-bye.